In this video, we're going to be taking a look inside the mind of a hacker. How do they think? What are they trying to accomplish? How do they choose their targets? If you want to understand how to protect yourself in the world of cybersecurity, you need to know your enemy. And as Sun Tzu said, to know your enemy, you must become your enemy. When most people think of hackers, they're actually thinking of cybercriminals. These are the ones you hear about that hold sensitive data ransom from tech companies and government agencies, the ones that orchestrate attacks to crash websites, even the ones that leak footage of video games before they're released. But many people don't realize there is another group of hackers that exist to protect against these cyber criminals, and they're called penetration testers. Penetration testers, also known as white hats and ethical hackers, are used by companies to exploit vulnerabilities in a network that could be attacked by cyber criminals. Companies give them free rein to try to crack into their systems through a concept called offensive security. They use many of the same techniques that cyber criminals do, but the distinction is they are authorized to gain unauthorized access. Cyber criminals, on the other hand, are not authorized to access the systems they're trying to crack into. They want to when they gain access to a company's network. That could be disrupting services, releasing sensitive data, stealing intellectual property, or holding a system hostage so they can be paid a ransom. They could be lone actors or a group of individuals. There are even some cybercrime gangs that are propped up by governments, most notably the Lazarus Group in North Korea. So basically, it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. Wait, who are we going to get for ugly? Oh my God! Despite their differences, both sides are using many of the same tools and techniques, and the key thing they're looking for is initial access. Initial access consists of the techniques using various entry points that allow an attacker or a penetration tester to gain a foothold on your network. Some of these techniques basically involve the tech version of a creep offering a kid a piece of candy. They want to trick you into giving them access to computers on your network. They also want to try to exploit weaknesses in anything that's available to the public, like a web server, service, or application. Once initial access is gained, it's possible, if not likely, for an attacker to move around on the network and eventually take full control with administrator privileges. At that point, they've basically got you by the Now that you know what initial access means, let's expand on some of the methods used to get it. You can also check out Tim MalcomVetter's blog, How We Breach Your Network, which we'll link in the description for advice on some of the controls that can protect from these attacks. First on the list, exploitable vulnerabilities in internet-facing services. There are two types of concerns here, and the main difference is whether it's a vulnerability or actually a misconfiguration. On one side, you have a list called CVE. It stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. These are publicly disclosed computer security flaws that are acknowledged by a software's vendor. Once a CVE is released, it creates a race against time. Hackers are scanning for these CVEs within hours or minutes of release and trying to exploit these vulnerabilities, while companies are trying to patch them as quickly as possible. On the flip side, there are many security issues that vendors won't report to the public because they fall into a category called a misconfiguration. Most of the time, these are actually the results of resource constraints. IT teams will try to slap on a basic set of configurations and move on to their next project.
You said it and forget it.
Companies require a lot of IT services in order to operate. And sometimes they leave this technology available to the public when they shouldn't. It could be tools for software development, temporary troubleshooting or testing configurations, maybe even an administrator portal that they didn't think anyone would find. Because these conditions aren't recognized as vulnerabilities, they're not going to get patched, which means it's easy for hackers to continually attack an organization that isn't taking appropriate steps to shore up their technology configurations. The next method is abusing internet-facing authentication mechanisms. I know a lot of you have probably seen this before. You get an email that says Jim Bob wants you to access a file on Google Drive. You click the link and it asks for your credentials. But it turns out that wasn't actually Google Drive, and the email you received didn't come from your friend Jim Bob. That's called phishing, and 96% of phishing attacks start with an email. Sure, some of these emails look absolutely ridiculous, and nobody would be dumb enough to open them.
I've fallen and I can't get up.
But as technology has evolved and the average attention span of the user has diminished, attackers have been able to create more and more convincing attacks. Even if you pay close attention to what you're opening, it's possible to become the victim of a phishing scam. In this instance, the attacker's target is login credentials, and one set of login credentials may be all they need to have the keys to the kingdom. I mean, you did provision access based on least privilege, right? Right? Next up, phishing for malware. This is where attackers use phishing scams, like the ones we just talked about, to trick you into opening a malicious file or to take you to a website infected with malware. You see, Jim Bob wants you to click on a new link and open up a OneDrive folder. Now go ahead and download that file he wants you to take a look at. Whoops. Malware is software that's specifically designed to disrupt, damage, or gain unauthorized access to a computer system, and it serves as a springboard for attackers to gain control of your system. Malware comes in many forms, which we'll cover in another video, and that opens up a large attack surface. There are tools that can help protect against malware to some extent, but the tools are slow to catch up with always evolving malware. That's why malware is such an effective tool for hackers to gain initial access. Another method is the use of a rogue device. A rogue device is where hackers place an unauthorized machine on a network where sensitive systems reside. They may use that device to bypass firewalls and other network controls that are intended to keep them out. They may also use the device to capture passwords and other sensitive data transmitted over the private network. A rogue device could be a credit card skimmer, or it could be a fake Wi-Fi network you have people connect to for internet access and then capture all of their communications. While this approach is less common, it does still happen. The last method of initial access we'll be discussing is a supply chain attack. This is where hackers gain access to a system through a technology partner or provider. Any of the third-party tools or services that you're using could open up your system for a hacker to gain full control. In a supply chain attack, a hacker is essentially using a spare key to get into your house. One of the notable supply chain attacks was on SolarWinds, a networking tool vendor, and it affected as many as 18,000 companies using their software. So this method of initial access has a broad scope of impact, and as companies rely on more and more technology providers, it will remain an effective tool for hackers. Now that you know what initial access is and you know how it's achieved, you're beginning to understand how hackers hack. They want that initial foothold into a system so that they can move around and potentially take full control, not just of your system, but of the various systems on your network. As technology becomes increasingly important and more complex for businesses, it will only become more critical to protect against cybercriminals. That's why it's good to know what you're up against. If you like this video, go ahead and give us a thumbs up. If you're looking for all kinds of amazing cybersecurity content, subscribe to our channel. Go ahead, do it. We'll catch you next time.